함경북도 청진시의 신암시장 앞 공터. 20대 남녀 7명이 고개를 떨구고 있습니다. 붉은 두건을 쓴 여성이 옆에 선 남성으로부터 성매매를 했다는 이유로 공기재판을 받고 있는 모습입니다. 성매매의 대가로 받은 돈은 북한 돈 1,000원. 북한에서 쌀 1kg 정도, 우리 돈으로는 약 2,500원에 해당되는 돈에 몸을 팔아야 할 정도로 고단한 삶을 살았던 이 여성은 곧이어 수갑이 채워진 채 노동교화소로 실려갑니다. 함께 재판을 받은 남자들도 위조 달러 사용과 강도, 강간 혐의가 인정돼 처벌을 받았습니다. 막 식사를 마친 듯 보이는 북한 병사 2명이 담배를 피우며 한가로운 시간을 보냅니다. 길가에서 아이스크림을 맛있게 먹는 병사의 모습도 눈에 띕니다. 옹기종기 모여 군부를 쬐며 능숙하게 담배를 꺼내우는 10살 안팎의 소년들. 언제 씻었는지 분간이 안 될 정도로 지저분한 얼굴. 김일성 초상화가 걸려있는 광장에서 피곤에 지친 듯 잠을 청하는 사람들. 한 여자 어린이는 굶주림에 지쳐 풀이 무성한 철길 위에 죽은 듯 드러누워 일어날 줄을 모릅니다. 따분한 듯 주사기를 갖고 노는 어린이의 얼굴에는 굶주림의 흔적이 역력합니다. 계란과 옥수수를 먹고 있는 주민들을 바라보고 있는 어린 꽃제비. 배고픔에 지친 한 아이는 벽에 기대 잠을 청합니다. 쓰레기통에서 먹을 것을 골라 비닐봉지에 담는 모습도 보입니다. 동상으로 발가락이 모두 잘려나간 누더기 차림의 어린이도 눈에 띕니다. 가지고 놀던 소주병을 깨버리는 모습이 위험해 보입니다. 이곳 청진은 꽃제비들이 굶거나 얼어 죽는 경우가 적지 않아 주민들도 무관심하게 넘기는 상황이라고 한 탈북자가 이야기합니다. 중앙일보는 국내에 처음 공개되는 북한의 공개재판 광경 등 생생한 화면을 담은 동영상을 단독 입수했습니다. 90분 분량의 비디오 테이프에는 청진 지역 어린 불황아들의 참담한 모습과 탈북자 수용소인 수성관리소의 모습 등이 담겨 있습니다. 이 동영상은 북한 국경
political prison camps where prisoners are essentially treated as slaves in some of the worst conditions Amnesty International has documented in the past 50 years.
물 먹고. 어? 물 먹어? 아버지마 어디? 엄마.
화폐 교환을 청구한다고 6개월 합의하고 7개월이지 않아?
뭐 꽃집이 방랑자가 많아졌고, 그다음에는 자살해 죽는 사람이 많아졌다. 뭐 자살해 죽는 사람. 늙은이 젊은이 할 것 없이 자살해 죽는 사람이 많아졌어요.
Maar in tegenstelling tot ons denk ik dat de armoede meer eerlijker verdeeld is dan in onze samenleving. Iedereen is arm. En
zelfs de elite in Pyongyang?
Ja.
Despite missile launches, underground nuclear tests, and bellicose language, tourists can still visit North Korea. I also went there as a tourist, because journalists are barred from entering the country. Tourists cannot move around freely. We travel across the country in our own bus. We stay in beautiful hotels, far from North Koreans. Nevertheless, tourists can see a lot, even if we don't always know what we're seeing.
Het kantoor van ons is er vlakbij. Dus,
Yap Timmer worked for the Red Cross for 3.5 years in North Korea. He looked at the footage I took. The metro in the capital, Pyongyang, is one of the highlights of a trip to the workers' paradise. It's the means of transport for workers. It's beautifully decorated, but according to Timmer, the metro is not as great as tourists are led to believe.
Hij rijdt nog, dat is al heel, dat is heel bijzonder. Ze weten ook als er buitenlanders zijn, zullen ze altijd voor zorgen dat er in ieder geval nog elektriciteit is. Maar hij staat wel stil, dat hoor ik van mijn staf al. Mijn secretaresse, die kon met de metro. En als ze dus met de metro ging, ging het ietsje sneller. Maar ze gaven toch de voorkeur aan om te gaan lopen, over het algemeen. Alleen als het regende, dan wilden ze wel een stuk met de metro gaan. Maar voor de rest zei ze, ja, dan ben ik in ieder geval zeker, dan weet ik wanneer ik thuis kom. Met onze water- en sanitatieprojecten. En daar moesten soms kilometers pijp gelegd worden en die moesten ingegraven worden in de grond. En dan werden 2000 mensen gemobiliseerd en die groeven dat met de hand. En dan kun je zeggen, is dat nou vrijwilligerswerk? Wat voor soort werk is dat nou? Maar mensen waren daar, die deden dat graag, want 3 weken later hadden ze water. En die zagen gewoon resultaat van zo'n gemeenschappelijke inspanning. Direct. En waarschijnlijk ook niet het alternatief kennis. Men mist de aansluiting met wat er in de wereld gebeurt. Geen internetaansluiting. Geen nieuwe studieboeken. Ja, dan denk je dat het verschil wordt te groot. Ja, en hier gaan we de brug over naar Dandong. China. Het is inderdaad de brug met de...
Ho delivers military history lectures for visitors. This would seem to be one of the most important tourist attractions in the country. According to the guide, in this very hall and at these very desks on July the 27th, 1953, North Korea and the USA signed the Armistice Agreement without the participation of the South. It was a precarious non-aggression pact that should ultimately have led to a final peace treaty, but never did. There are no South Korean soldiers to be seen along the clearly marked military border today. It's said that they keep it under surveillance using binoculars and cameras, while remaining where tourists won't see them. Technically, a state of war still exists between the parties, following the conflict that resulted in millions of casualties and ravaged the peninsula.
소방의 그 방송, 버더, TV를 비롯한 선전물이 거의 전부다시피 이거 다 미국이 통제하에 있다는 데 대해서는 나도 알고 있습니다. 미국이 진정으로 세계의 평화, 조선반도의 평화를 바란다면 남조선에서 저들의 무력을 하루빨리 철수시키고 이 조선반도의 그 평화 보장을 위해서 진심으로 노력해야 합니다.
Several meters away, a group of American Christians, some of South Korean descent, pray for reunification. There are now huge differences between the two sides, historic, economic and cultural. Even the language has begun to differ. But families living on opposite sides of this divide still try to preserve ties between close relatives torn apart by war. It's a painful issue that's often used as a bargaining chip in talks between Pyongyang and Seoul. Dozens of people from the south, all selected by drawing lots, came to the mountains in Kumpang region in North Korea's east coast in search of brothers and sisters, nephews, and even children they were never given the opportunity to know. After several years, in February, family members separated by war are granted just 3 days to see each other. For many, it's their last chance.
I don't involve any of the politics or any of the religion part, but we just wanted to, this is a one country and this is a one people.
On her second trip to the country in 8 years, Mrs. Lee met us in Kaesong, the next stop after our trip to the border.
First trip was very sad. It was really dark, no lights. You know, during the mealtime, lights go off like 5-6 times. And there are no smiles from people's face. But now I think it's economically changing, but I think some kind of life is coming back.
The differences between Kaesong and Pyongyang are striking. This city is one of the few examples of direct economic cooperation between North and South. The only joint industrial complex is based here. It encompasses over 100 South Korean companies, employing 53,000 North Koreans. Colonel Kim Chang-yun comes with us to the so-called demilitarized zone, which ironically is one of the most heavily armed areas in the world.
그것은 조선 반도를 북과 둘로 갈라놓아 우리 민이 영원히 통일을 하지 못하게 하려는 미국과 남조선 당국자들의 그릇된 정책에서 빚어진 산지하에.
He's talking about the wall erected on the South Korean side. It was completed in 1979, and Washington and Seoul deny its existence, though they do acknowledge there are certain anti-tank facilities in place. This 4-kilometer-wide natural barrier divides the peninsula. South Korea looms in the distance. Seoul is a little over 50 kilometers away. From here on the North Korean side, and using the Colonel's binoculars, we're able to see South Korean military bases, flying UN flags on the opposite side. We can also see what the North Koreans are talking about, a 5-meter-high wall stretching from east to west.
장벽을 건설한 목적은 우리를 군사적 공격 출발 진지로 만들어 놓고 장벽을 우리를 쉽게 타격하게 한 이런 군사적 목적이 더 큰 것만큼 이것이 세계에 폭로되면 아주 불리하다고 생각하면서 이 자체를 부인하고 있습니다.
Chang-yong can take pride in just how much trust the Marshal vests in him, keeping him posted on the main border and in his 40 years of continued service in the People's Army.
전통적으로 물려주는 변하지 않는 전통은 위대한 김정은 동지를 수반한 당중아이를 목숨으로 사수하자 이런 신념이 구호입니다.
Revolutionary policy in the DPRK is based on the principles of Songgon, meaning military first, a philosophy that reached its heyday during Kim Jong-il's reign that lasted more than 20 years. The more time passes, the more complex and controversial the concept becomes. A 170-meter tower keeps this fire burning at the monument to Juche. Ideologically, a permissive and slightly spiritual adaptation of communism ascribed to Kim Il-sung. It promotes national and personal self-reliance, or rather, reliance on the masses who are dubbed the masters of revolution and national development. Although the ideology may seem controversial and mysterious, and even dangerous to foreigners, it is constantly referred to. The state-endorsed image of utopian self-reliance and self-sufficiency is in stark contrast to economic reality in the country, which remains dependent on outside help and suffers from an acute shortage of currency. Cargo ships sail into the locks of the East China Sea, bringing goods from China, still the main supplier of provisions and aid received through international assistance. Last year, more than 2 million people in the DPRK benefited from United Nations aid. Chinese goods fill the model supermarket shelves in Pyongyang, alongside locally manufactured products which serve as an example of the country's economic prowess. The closest estimate was from the Bank of South Korea. According to Seoul, its northern neighbor demonstrated 1.1% of economic growth in the last year. However, as is so often the case, Pyongyang has released no official data. Small shops and food distribution centers where local people pick up their monthly food rations didn't feature in our itinerary. We were also warned not to film construction sites, and especially construction workers, many of whom are servicemen. They told us that workwear smeared with cement would give a false impression of the country. However, we were allowed to film from afar this footage of the Teachers' Tower in the capital, along with the construction of a new terminal building and tarmac at the airport, renovation of the May the 1st football stadium, and construction of the 5-star Rugyong Hotel, housed in the tallest building in Pyongyang, which is still underway after 27 years of work. Plus many other buildings and complexes whose construction was initiated by Kim Jong-un.
그러니까 경영 원수님께서 이게 우리 병원에 이제 찾아오실 때 작년 이제 며칠 있으면 된다. 10월 5일 날 이제 경영 원수님께서 이제 그 완공을 앞둔 우리 병원에 오셨을 때 이제 쭉 돌아보시고 그때는 이제 구림이 많지 않았습니다. 여기에 구림이 군데 있었는데 이거 아동 병원인 것만큼 아동 심리에 맞게 사방 다 구림으로 장식해야 된다고 말씀하시고 그다음.
So we started construction of this museum in September 2012, and under the wise leadership of the president, under the wise leadership of the Marshal Kim Jong-un, we finished the construction within only 10 months. The museum and the weapons exhibitions outside and all the renovations, the monuments, everything was done within only 10 months' time.
The news block at the state-controlled TV channel focuses entirely on the country's economy. The biggest share of North Korea's GDP is from industry and mining, followed by the service sector and agriculture, which isn't enough to meet the population's needs. Slightly over 15% of the land can be farmed. Tourism and disguised foreign investments are sources of foreign currency badly needed in a country living with sanctions and economic war. Tourists are only allowed to pay in euros, US dollars or Chinese yuan. They have to pay higher tourist prices. The few foreigners who visit the country, many of whom are Chinese, are constantly accompanied by one or several guides. Tourists can't leave their room in the 47-story hotel, complete with 5 restaurants and souvenir shop, and walk unattended to the casino in the basement. It's leased by a company from Macau. Only twice did we get the chance to walk the streets of Pyongyang. The rest of the time we were chauffeur-driven in a minivan. Every morning and night, several times a day, this disturbing melody can be heard playing on the many loudspeakers in Pyongyang's railway station. Newcomers are immersed in a nightmarish atmosphere, a funeral march serving to remind all who pass through of the great eternal generals. Every visitor to the capital brings flowers. They must pay their respect to the colossal bronze statues standing at the top of Mansu Hill. North Koreans say that they're required to perform this ceremony each and every time they visit any city. A quite remarkable number of literary works are attributed to the great generals. The National Library contains the selected outstanding works of the founder of the nation. There are more than 700 volumes of Kim Il-sung's speeches, books and plays. One of the best known by the eternal president is a speech calling on the people to support his son, Kim Jong-il, who would soon take over from his father.
김일성 대원수님과 경양 김정일 장군님 그리고 현재 우리 김정은 원수님 이 세 분이 그 세상 사람들이 이제 어떻게 이해하겠는지 그건 모르겠지만 우리에게는 그 남들한테 설명하자면 역사적으로 풀어야 되잖아요. 그런 설명은 필요 없고 한 가족에서 부모와 자식 간에 우리 혈연 관계나 같다는 거. 우선 우리가 일제 때부터 역사를 파자면 다른 나라한테 목해서 살 때 우리나라를 진짜 찾아주시고 우리에게 모든 이거 삶의 행복과 모든 것을 다 마련해 주도록 정치를 펴 나가시는. 그러니까 만민이 진짜 우러르고 투표도 하고 우리 이분을 대통령으로 모셔주시오.
It's almost 3 years since Kim Jong-il died. Throughout that time, his image has been closely linked with that of his father, the eternal president. Kim Il-sungia orchids and Kim Jong-ilia begonias grace all public gardens and civic buildings. Images captured by a camera have to be perfect. The taking of partial pictures of the general's statues or photographs marred by lens flare is strictly forbidden. North Koreans all wear special insignia near their hearts. The badges bear portraits of the leaders, and among other things, they show the wearer's merit and how close they are to the government. We were told that the hardest to obtain depicts the smiling faces of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il together. Buildings are generously adorned with their portraits. There are 2 separate but identical halls, each of which contain the leaders' embalmed bodies. The Kumsusan mausoleum represents the apotheosis in the leader's cult. Photography inside is strictly forbidden. 2 seemingly endless moving walkways are decorated with the generals' pictures portraying their lives and work. They lead to pharaonic marble halls containing the mummified leaders, surrounded by treasured objects from their respective eras. Armored trains and cars, an array of medals and decorations, even a huge map giving a detailed account of their travels. North Koreans dress in their finest clothes and flock in their hundreds to the mausolea. Today, our film